Hi, I'm Eric, the security guy. Today we're going hands-on with software-defined WAN technology, or SD-WAN for short, with an example of how to use it to protect access into a cloud environment. This is my first time doing a screen recording in quite a while, so I am only recording a portion of my screen to be kind to those of you on smaller monitors. Please let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions or how well this works out for you. So today we're talking about how to secure remote access into cloud environments such as Amazon Web Services. A couple different approaches I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You can use a VPN. A traditional point-to-point VPN certainly has some limitations, especially if you're working in multiple cloud environments or you want communication between your cloud environments. So today we're going to be talking about what I like to refer to as a VPN on steroids. It's called SD-WAN, or software-defined WAN. And the product we're going to be using is called ZeroTier. To be clear, this is not sponsored. I use ZeroTier because it works well for me. But I have no business relationship with them other than as a customer. One of the attractive things about ZeroTier, for those of you doing personal projects or with small businesses, is the pricing is really attractive. Up to 50 network nodes with one administrator for free. Obviously, if you're a business using this, you probably want to move into the professional tier, which allows up to 10 administrators and up to 500 nodes on your network for $49 a month, which is pretty reasonable. So let's move over to the Security Guy AWS account. For those of you not familiar with AWS, we're going to start with a little bit of a tour just so you can see how I've set this up and how I'm going to tweak this a little bit to give a really convenient access, remote access to cloud resources via the SD-WAN for administration or also for internal applications. So we'll start by surfing into VPC. Those of you not familiar with AWS, VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. And by default in this region, Amazon has already created one VPC. And you can see it's set up with a private address block and a couple of subnets. Again, Amazon has created these by default. We sort them by IP. You'll see that they're essentially the VPC is broken down into 6 subnets. And I've simply named them Access Tier 1 and Tier 2. A good practice if you're deploying applications in the cloud is to use multiple subnets and separate out your application tiers. Makes writing security group rules, using network ACLs and other security approaches to defense in depth a little bit easier. So before we go any further, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to enable IPv6 for our access tier. And that is simply because products like ZeroTier have a lot of functionality to work around network limitations, firewalls, particularly when end users are accessing it. But to give us our maximum chance of having good connectivity, we're going to enable IP version 6 as well. So we're going to go dual stack in the access tier. In order to do that, we'll flip over to the VPC. We will edit the network addresses for the VPC, and we're going to add an Amazon-provided IP version 6 block. So we now have our own set of addresses available for this VPC. Next thing we need to do is we need to go into the route table. Since we've enabled IPv6, we need to add a route to allow egress and ingress traffic via the existing gateway. So in this case, just to keep our example simple, we're going to add a default route for IP version 6 and point it at our existing internet gateway. So now we're set up for IPv6 in this VPC. The next thing we're going to do is go into our access subnet, and we're going to enable IPv6 there as well. And now we're all set with dual stack in our access VPC. Next, we'll flip over to EC2 and take a look at what we have here. In this test account, we have one instance running and you'll see it has a public IP. This is the server that we want to establish secure connectivity for administration or perhaps for some internal only services. So in order to set this up, what we're going to do is we're going to create an EC2 instance to act as a router in and out of this VPC for the SD-WAN. Now you might be asking yourself, why don't I just install the SD-WAN on the server? I have 50 free licenses. I certainly could do that. But the challenge from a security perspective is that if we install our SD-WAN directly on the server, then any traffic on the SD-WAN is going to bypass all of our other layers of security. So they won't be subject to any of the security groups. They're going to bypass AWS guard duty if you're using that for intrusion detection and all those other things. So we want to use our SD-WAN as an additional layer of security instead of replacing other layers that exist. So we're going to start by launching a small instance. You can use pretty much any version of Linux that you like. In my case, I prefer Ubuntu, so we're going to grab Ubuntu Server 2004 LTS. We'll select that. Just need a small instance to act as a router, so a T3A Nano will certainly do for the type of traffic that most people would have for administration. Obviously, if you have hundreds of people accessing an internal resource, you might want to bump that up to a little beefier hardware. We have one instance. We're going to locate this machine on our access tier. We're going to, in this case, auto assign an IP address, both IP version 4 and IP version 6 address. Just as a matter of practice, we're going to enable protection against external termination. Turn off unlimited. We don't want to pay extra for high CPU utilization. I'm going to bump up the disk just a little bit to make sure we don't embarrass ourselves by running a disk space while doing an example. 8 is probably enough, but we'll just bump it up for this. We'll add ourselves a name tag while we're in the system. And next, for a security group, SD-WAN uses, particularly the ZeroTier SD-WAN uses UDP. So we're going to create a separate security group for this instance. To start off with, we're going to leave the SSH port open. Of course, in practice, you'd probably want to lock this down temporarily to your own IP address. But in this case, I don't want to show my IP address on camera. So for right now, we'll just leave that open for a few minutes to the world. Then we're going to create a custom UDP rule. And we're going to allow essentially all of the high ports from 1024 to, we'll say 1025, 65535, and again from anywhere. This is going to allow our SD-WAN to communicate effectively because it is a peer-to-peer technology. This is also another good reason to run it on a separate little instance as a router instead of installing it on all of your production servers. And finally, we're going to pick the already existing security guy key pair and fire up this instance. So while this instance is launching, it's going to take a couple minutes. Let's go over to ZeroTier. We're going to start. This is a fresh ZeroTier account. We're going to log in, and then I will be back in a sec. Okay, now we're logged back in again. I guess it timed out while we're working in AWS. We're going to start by creating a network. A lot of different options here. We're just going to create a network. You see it by default, it gives us a name. We're going to go in. I don't really like the default name, so we're going to call this SD-WAN Security Guy 1. We're also going to make a note of our network ID because we're going to need that later to connect instances to it. So we'll just put that in a scratch pad. We want a public private. A public would allow anyone to join. Obviously, it's not much point from a security perspective. We want to keep it private. And we can see that it's already defaulted to a range for us, 10.144. That works fine for us, and it doesn't conflict with anything else we're doing. Obviously, if you had a more advanced doing more advanced configuration or you had a lot of cloud environments, you want to make sure you pick an address range either from this list or go into advanced and define your own, so that you don't have any conflicts between the address range you're going to be using for the ZeroTier SD-WAN and your various environments. So at this point, this is actually set up. This is all we need. We have we have a network setup. We have a network ID, and then our members will pop up here as we join the network. So let's go back and see how our instance is coming along. And we can see that it's initializing. Because we're going to use this as a router in and out of our VPC, there are two very important things. There are two very important things we need to do. The first is we need to go into networking and we need to disable the source destination checking. It's a little backwards the way Amazon shows it. Instead of just turning the source destination checking on and off, to turn it off, you actually check a box that says stop. What this means is that Amazon will now allow traffic to enter this or to be sent to this instance that is destined to an IP address other than that instance itself. So we're going to enable that. And the next thing we're going to do, and we see that it is now running, is we need to make one other change in our VPC. We want to set a route to this box so we can use it as a router to and from the ZeroTier SD-WAN. So we're going to go back into our route tables. You can see there's only one routes. We're going to edit our routes again. And we're going to take the IP address range of our SD-WAN, which is right here. And we're going to create a route or add a route to that destination. And in this case, we're going to specify an instance and our EC2 instance we've just created as an SD-WAN router and save that route. So again, if we look at this routing table, we'll see that the default for the internet remains the gateway, both IPv4 and IPv6. But now any traffic to our SD-WAN address is going to be sent to this instance, and we've turned off source checking. So this will be now allow this little instance to work as a router. I'm just going to pause the video for a sec, set up an SSH session, and I'll be right back. Okay, we've now got an SSH session up. The first thing we're going to do, as usual, is we're going to get root on this machine, and we're going to make sure the operating system is reasonably up to date, which unfortunately is often not the case when you spin up a new machine these days. And I'll just pause the recording until this is done. That did take a couple minutes to complete, and along the way it did install a new kernel and, as you can see, a microcode update. So we're going to want to reboot this before we install the SD-WAN on it, just to make sure everything's running well. However, before we do that, we can address one other thing that we do need to do, is we need to turn on IPv4 forwarding so that this system, again, can act as a router for us. See, there's a line here. I know it's a little hard to see on the screen because of the color, but it says net.ipv4 IP forward equals 1. And by uncommenting this, next time the machine boots and anytime thereafter, it'll automatically have IP forwarding turned on. So now we'll reboot this, and I'll be back as soon as it's rebooted and I have a SSH session set up again. All right, our SD-WAN router running Ubuntu is back up and running. It's all updated. And just to recap, we have configured the VPC, including the route tables for subnets, to use this this box as a router. Back to the ZeroTier WAN, we have enabled IP forwarding. So the remaining task we need to do on this VM is simply to install ZeroTier. ZeroTier does have some simple installation instructions. I've had a look at their script before, and I do trust it. So in this case, I'm just going to paste in their suggested install script. Obviously, we do need to be careful when we're downloading something and running it as root. This script will not only install ZeroTier, but you can see it's doing it via the package manager so that future updates will work using, in this case, apt or yum if you're on a CentOS or AWS Linux variant. And this should just take another few seconds. Perfect. So the ZeroTier is installed, it's up and running, and then our final task on this VM is going to be to use the is to ask ZeroTier to join our network that we've previously defined. So we'll issue the ZeroTier CLI join command, and it's responded with an OK. So we'll flip back to our ZeroTier configuration. And we'll refresh this. And now we can see that our device has joined the ZeroTier network. Of course, there's a note saying it should have at least 2 members, obviously, because having only 1 member on a LAN. To enable it and to allow it access, again, at this point, it's been joined, but it's not being given access to our private network. All we have to do is click here to authenticate it. ZeroTier will automatically assign it an address on the ZeroTier WAN. While we're waiting for a second or so for it to do that, we'll give this a name. And we can now see that ZeroTier has assigned an IP address. And even though these are assigned at enrollment time or at when it's joined the network, this address will not change. So it is, although it's automatically chosen by the ZeroTier, it will not change during the lifetime of this node on the SD-WAN, which makes it convenient for routing purposes. We'll scroll up, and their final task is we will add a route to our Amazon VPC via the this SD-WAN box. So now any other node that joins this this SD-WAN will get this route and be able to communicate through the router we've created in Amazon to the rest of the VPC, assuming the security groups in the VPC allow that. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Going back to our SSH session, if we look at the IP address, we'll now see that ZeroTier has added another interface to this machine, and it has the IP address that we expected to have on the ZeroTier SD-WAN that we saw in the ZeroTier console. So this is all set up. The next thing we can do is, now that we have secure connectivity into this VPC, we can make some changes to the security groups. So we're going to go into our server, have a look at the security group, and as expected, it's open to the entire world to allow SSH connectivity. We'll edit this security group, And instead of allowing the whole universe in, for right now, we're going to lock it down to addresses on the SD-WAN. In other words, if you're on the SD-WAN, you're allowed to communicate with this EC2 instance on the SSH port. Finally, to show this all works, I'm going to join my computer to the SD-WAN, and I'll be back in just a moment to show you how it works. I already had the ZeroTier client installed on my PC. The client is available for Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and Linux, so has fairly good coverage. All I've done while the recording was paused is I went into my ZeroTier client on my Windows machine, and I joined it to the network through the GUI, and you can see there is now another system joined and is waiting for approval. We'll approve that. And you can see now that an address has been assigned to my laptop. So with my laptop now on the same ZeroTier SD-WAN, and as an aside, with the exception of mobile devices, which are somewhat limited by iOS and Android restrictions, most desktop computers, so Windows, Mac, Linux machines, can be connected to multiple ZeroTier networks at the same time. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip back over to our Amazon account. We're going to this time grab the private IP address for this server. And then we're going to modify the SSH entry for that server. And instead of connecting on the public IP addresses, which is no longer allowed by the security group, we're going to plug in the private IP and demonstrate that we now have connectivity across the SD-WAN routed into the Amazon VPC to this server. Our SSH session timed out, so let's have a look and see what the problem is. I suspect I made a mistake with the security group role for the server. And sure enough, I included the IP address range for the VPC when I should have included the IP address of we now have connectivity from our desktop across the SD-WAN through the router that we've built in our Amazon VPC to our destination server. And of course, this technique can be used for a lot more than SSH. It can be used to access all sorts of internal resources that you don't want to expose to the internet. I hope you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments below. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next video.